me know how much you know about me, but I'm probably the most vocal anti-children transitioning person on the internet. It's what I'm.
Right.
I let you speak.
The best thing you can do for us is grow out your mustache and tell people not to live like you. That is the best thing that you can do to help us.
Over the past year, a constitutional amendment was stripped by a small portion of the population.
At the Supreme Court today, an historic upheaval. In a sweeping ruling that overturned a half a century of precedents, 5 justices ended the right of American women to choose abortion under the Constitution.
Hundreds of anti-trans laws have been proposed and an equally ridiculous amount passed under the guise of protection.
The Kentucky General Assembly passing a sweeping anti-trans bill. The WHS 1119 was there in Frankfort for the vote tonight. The bill bans gender-affirming medical care for minors, allows teachers to ignore a student's preferred pronouns, and trans students from using the restroom tied to their gender identity.
Transgender athlete bans introduced in 31 states, signed into law so far in Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee.
At 11, the North Carolina House passing the Fairness in Women's Sports Act today.
The bill says transgender females cannot participate in sports that correspond with their gender identity.
The transgender community in the United States is reeling as Republican lawmakers and prominent conservative figures try to curtail their rights. A record number of bills relating to health care, access to bathrooms, even drag performances have already been tabled this year in state legislatures.
Just 1 week ago, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem signed into law legislation that bans transgender girls and college-age women from playing on female sports teams. So far, over a dozen states are considering anti-LGBTQ+ laws just in 2022. And according to the report from the Human Rights Campaign, 2022 could be the most anti-trans legislative year in history. Could be one of the most in history, which is not great. And that's after 2021, which set a record for anti-trans legislation with 147 bills.
Last week, its governor signed a law banning drag shows on public property. Also, gender-affirming health care for trans youth is prohibited there now.
The consequence is harm, fear, and hatred. The end result is unrest since people have to fight just to exist. You have to understand, despite what you see on social media, that trans adults are less than 2 million people in this country and about 300,000 children.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
Because it's worth noting, Shep, that in real life, these situations are exceedingly rare.
How does that tie into disability rights? Disabled Americans have faced similar walls as other minority groups.
Race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexuality. People had to claw and scratch and fight and protest and pass legislation in order for those things to get recognized as valid.
What does flying mean to you?
In theory, it should be a way for me to be on a level playing field with people who don't have physical disabilities, because the world should be just as open to me as to anyone else. But flying to me is also an incredible barrier right now. It feels like an obstacle that I'm expected to figure out how to overcome. The world should not become small because you're disabled.
But one of the toughest things she faces is finding doctors who know how to treat patients with disabilities, or even want to. And she says something as basic as going to the bathroom in a medical building can be a nightmare.
This is dehumanizing. There have been times where I go to the bathroom, I can't fit my chair in the stall, so my chair is sitting in the doorway. The doorway is wide open, and I have to go to the bathroom.
In the 1970s, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was only a fragile protection facing constant challenges. In the Supreme Court ruling, Southeastern Community College v. Davis ruled that a hearing-impaired student could not participate in a nursing program. They determined she would not be able to perform at the same level as other students due to her reliance on lip reading. The Reagan administration also threatened the Rehabilitation Act due to a desire to cut regulations.
It is time to check and reverse the growth of government, which shows signs of having grown beyond the consent of the governed. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people.
Something modern leadership has done over the years, the consequences are always the same: someone benefits while many suffer.
In 2008, Congress mandated that every major railroad develop a PTC system in the Rail Safety Improvement Act. It took 12 years for all of the railroads to fully implement PTC.
Freight rail companies need to stop fighting us every time we try to do a regulation.
Norfolk Southern's CEO said that the company supports legislative efforts to enhance rail safety. And Union Pacific says its inspection and maintenance policies go above and beyond requirements.
The disabled community in the 80s rallied, sharing accounts of the day-to-day of the time. They piled into Senate hearings by the hundreds while politicians shared personal accounts of relatives who lived with a disability.
Over the years, experience has taught us that we must be constantly aware of people's attempts to discriminate against us. We must be prepared at every moment to fight this discrimination. The average American is not, nor should they have to be prepared to fight every day of their life for basic civil rights. All too many incidences of discrimination have gone by undefended because of lack of protection under the law. In the past, disability has been a cause for shame. This forced acceptance of second-class citizenship has stripped us as disabled people of pride and dignity. This is not the way we as Americans should have to live our lives. When I was 5, my mother proudly pushed my wheelchair to our local public school, where I was promptly refused admission because the principal ruled that I was, quote, a fire hazard, end quote. I was forced to go on to home instruction, receiving 1 hour of education twice a week for 3.5 years. Was this the America of my parents' dreams? My entrance into mainstream society was blocked by discrimination and segregation. Segregation was not only on an institutional level, but also acted as an obstruction to social integration. As a teenager, I could not travel with my friends on the bus because it was not accessible. At my graduation from high school, the principal attempted to prevent me from accepting an award in a ceremony on stage simply because I was in a wheelchair. When I was 19, the house mother of my college dormitory refused me admission into the dorm because I was in a wheelchair and needed assistance. When I was 21 years old, I was denied an elementary school teaching credential because of, quote, paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis, end quote. At the time, I didn't know what sequelae meant. I went to the dictionary and looked it up and found out that it was because of. So it was obviously because of my disability that I was discriminated against. At the age of 25, I was told to leave a plane on my return trip to my job here in the U.S. Senate because I was flying without an attendant. In 1981, an attempt was made to forcibly remove me and another disabled friend from an auction house because we were, quote, disgusting to look at, end quote. In 1983, a manager at a movie theater attempted to keep my disabled friend and myself out of his theater because we could not transfer out of our wheelchairs. These are only a few examples of discrimination I have faced in my 40-year life. I successfully fought all of these attempted acts, be it aggressive confrontation or litigation. But this stigma scars for life. Many disabled persons experience discrimination of the same magnitude, but not every one of us possesses the intestinal fortitude and has the support of family and friends required to face up to these daily societal barriers.
And so it is time that our government recognize our abilities and give us the dignity to do what we can do. As a young man, I developed seizures, later diagnosed as epilepsy. For many years, for 5 years, as I had my seizures on a regular basis, I did not know what they were. I went to every doctor that you could think of. I also went to 3 witch doctors because I was supposedly possessed by the devil. My Republican colleagues think I am, but others believed I was.
ADA languished for 2 years, enduring hurdles, opposition, and the influence of lobbies, along with a flurry of amendments, some with merit and some based on fear, and a clearer definition of a disability. But it wasn't until the 1990s protective legislation was passed.
Well, the next thing I know, I've got 50 cameras on me, and I've got mics all over me, and it's like the hottest day, the month of March, and I'm just, I mean, and I'm like, I'm like 8, 9 years old, and I'm going, water, 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 I need water. And, I've got the little pamphlet in the back of my pocket that we're supposed to hand over to the politicians to get the ADA passed. And they say that it was the image of me climbing those steps that, was the final decision to get the ADA passed. And I mean, I had to do it.
The indignity that many face to get even the barest of laws, the lows, endless fighting for the basics that everyone able-bodied has from the jump: accessible buildings, anti-discrimination, transportation, housing.
Our 43 million Americans with disabilities. You have made this happen. All of you have made this happen. And to all of you, I just want to say your triumph is that your bill will now be law, and that this day belongs to you. And on behalf of our nation, thank you very, very much.
Hey. How you doing? Yeah. All right. There you go.
The prescriptions, transport, mental health, the social services, and housing, it just feels like every area has been infected by cuts. So I just gonna have to go around like this. I can't turn the light on, and it's just quite a unhygienic kind of crawl up onto the toilet. But I've fallen and knocked myself out on the sink.
Nothing about flying ever feels good for me. I never feel quite so much like a burden as I do when I'm getting on an airplane.
But even worse than all that's required to get on the plane can be what happens after landing. Because wheelchair users don't just entrust their lives to the airlines, they also have to hand over their custom-built medical equipment, which, in Ladau's case, costs upwards of $30,000.
Oh my God, it is broken.
Now where do I go?
This is every day for Michelle Lee, who was paralyzed from the neck down when she was 20.
And I don't have a lot of finger function or anything to open the door, and there's no button.
She can't get into some stores or narrow doorways or the train.
I can't go in, there's no elevator. I was told I have to go to another station at Clark and Lake in order to go to anywhere on the Blue Line.
That's 3 blocks away.
This stresses me out.
Lagoo first saw it back in 2012 while trying to help a patient who used a wheelchair. She badly needed to see a urologist but couldn't get an appointment.
I said, that doesn't make sense. There's a law called the ADA. Doctors are required to see patients who have disabilities. So let me make some calls after trying to call urologists all over the state. And I found out that it was true. I could not find this kind of doctor who would see a patient who used a wheelchair.
The more she dug, the more examples she found, including doctors who outright refused to see those patients at all. And she needed to know why. Her team held video focus groups asking doctors across the country what they do when people with disabilities want to see them.
One started with something like, I've thought about this a lot. I just say, I'm no longer taking new patients. And then another person interrupted and said, no, 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 no. You can't say that. You have to say, I don't take your insurance. And then another person interrupted and said, no, no, no. What you need to say is, you need specialized care, and I am not the doctor for you.
She said they don't treat you with empathy or understanding. So that, of course, will make anybody sad, I guess. It will make anybody feel hurt